So thank you again so much for joining us tonight for Bridging the Gap, a access education series for landowners and land back allies. We are doing this Rock Studies doing this in collaboration with Dutchess Land Conservancy and Columbia Land Conservancy. This is our first co-hosted event aiming to educate landowners in Columbia County and Dutchess County about the land access needs of beginning and queer and trans people of color that are land workers, and the importance of providing spaces to farm for these communities that have been historically marginalized and underfunded within the agricultural system. Just sharing a little bit about the history, according to the USDA census from 2022, there were reportedly 29 Black and/or African American, Asian, or other race farmers present within Dutchess County, and 1,305 white farmers within Dutchess County. And in the entire state of New York, 1.6% of farmers are people of color, despite representing 48% of the state's population. And nationwide, less than 1% of farmland is owned by Black farmers, about 5 million acres out of almost 900 million acres of total farmland. And we see this racial disparity as a result of the intentionally harrowing and expensive barriers to land ownership for non-white and queer folks. So because of this, we feel there's a need to educate folks on how to provide accessible resources to beginning queer and trans people of color farmers. This timely and essential education is to ensure that there are opportunities available to those that have been prevented from and are currently being prevented from attaining land and also sustaining their projects. And Stephanie will get into a little bit more about this, but just to share a little bit about our agenda tonight. So we will have some organization intros from Julie from Dutchess Land Conservancy, Dee from Rocksteady Farm, and Cameron from the Columbia Land Conservancy. And then Stephanie from the organization Northeast Farmers of Color, or NEFOC, will share a little bit about how the current political landscape impacts land access, a little bit about NEFOC as well, ethical land transferring, and we'll share a little bit about a couple case studies that are going on for NEFOC right now. And just a little bit on tech and logistics. So we are being recorded for folks that can't be here right now. There is closed captioning available. If you need to know how to turn that on, please let me know. If you have any other tech questions, please DM me and I will try to support you to the best of my ability. And please also ask any of your questions in the chat, and we will keep track of those for our Q&A portion at the end of after Stephanie's presentation. Okay. So now I will pass the mic to Julie. If you're ready, Julie, to give a little presentation on Dutchess Land Conservancy.
Thank you, Noah, and thank you all for being here tonight. We're really excited to be part of this. So can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I just put together a brief presentation. I wanted to talk a little bit about land trusts and what they do as a way of kind of setting the stage for some of the conversation that we're having tonight. So, sorry, too many buttons. Here we go. Okay. So a land trust is a nonprofit that, as all or part of its mission, works to acquire land or protect it with conservation easements, and is also stewarding that land. The conservation easement is a really important tool that we use, and there are a lot of different types of land trusts, from the national and international to the local. And so I'm trying to go through this as quickly as I can. I know we have a lot to go over tonight. But the Dutchess Land Conservancy in particular is dedicated to preserving the scenic agricultural and environmental resources in Dutchess County and surrounding areas. And we do that through a lot of different ways, protecting the land, stewarding it, the outreach and education programs that we do, of which this is a part of that, working with municipalities and working with volunteers. In terms of protecting land, as I said, the conservation easement is our primary tool for doing that. And that's something that, every organization has its own niche, its own particular focus. And that's our particular area of expertise in terms of land conservation. But I want to emphasize that, when you talk about land trusts and farms and a lot of conservation organizations, a lot of our taglines include something like connecting people to the land, and all of these different ways that we're doing that. That's the common thread that runs through all these different strategies of protecting and stewarding land, education and outreach, working with municipalities, having volunteer programs, people out on the land doing, trail work and invasives management. The public benefit is enormous in terms of land conservation. Just ask anyone who loves the scenic beauty of this area, appreciates the value of healthy and intact ecosystems, or just enjoys the farm fresh produce that we are so lucky to have here in this area. So the Dutchess Land Conservancy was founded in 1985. Happy 40th anniversary to us. And over that time, we've protected nearly 48,000 acres. I did a quick calculation, and that is approximately equal to the entire area of the whole town of Pine Plains and the whole town of Northeast. So it's quite a large amount of acreage. We're in the top 5% nationwide in terms of the acres protected by conservation easements, and in the top 1% nationally in terms of the number of conservation easements held. I know that sounds like bragging, and maybe it kind of is. We're definitely proud of all these achievements. But I just want to draw your attention to the fact that we hold over 450 easements. And the important part of that is the easements themselves and also the relationships that they create. And I think this is a thread that runs through all of our organizations who are here tonight. It's about those relationships. It's about, having the support of a vibrant community and working with your collaborators, partners, and volunteers. Those are all so crucial to everything that we're doing. Now, most recent statistics from our website, I want to draw your attention to the lower left-hand number, 21,000 acres of farmland protected. So that's very key, because when we're talking about land access, land conservation is a really critical component about that. If the land isn't protected or conserved in some way, it could be, bought up by a developer and turned into a subdivision, and you lose good farmland. So maintaining those critical farmlands are so important for everything that we do. We have a couple programs in particular that I want to highlight really quickly in how we work with farmers. When I mentioned conservation easements before, there's two main ways of doing that. One is through a donated easement. And the other way is through this purchase of development rights programs. So there are pots of money available at federal, state, county, town, and even private funding available to support the protection of farmland. And so over the years, we have raised over $53 million to protect farmland in and around Dutchess County. And that's resulted in over 7,000 acres of farmland protected. So think about that number just in terms of the landscape that's being protected, the functionality of those farmlands. Cameron will talk a little bit more about this, I'm sure. The Farmer Landowner Match Program is another really important component of our work with the farming community. Columbia Land Conservancy started this many, many years ago. The DLC has been partnering with them on this for over 10 years. And I'm sure you've all seen those bumper stickers that say, no farms, no food, or even better, the ones that say no farms, no beer. That is so true. And that's what this collaboration is all about, that farmers need land. That's really obvious, right? But think it through and you realize that the land needs farmers too. The land needs farmers to keep it healthy and productive. So, considering that the average age of a farmer is in their late 50s and that's continuing to rise, we need to work hard to ensure that those who want to farm have the resources that they need to be successful, whether you're talking about new farmers of any age, young farmers, and perhaps especially those from marginalized communities who face additional barriers. And that's why we're here tonight. Everyone has dreams, right? When I was a kid, I had that totally typical dream of being an astronaut. I watched a lot of Star Trek. But here I am, 50 plus years old, and I still have not flown the space shuttle. But on the other hand, I'm enough of a grown up to admit that I would have been an objectively terrible astronaut. Like, I get motion sickness really easily. My astronaut nickname would have been something like Barfy McUpchuck. So the barriers to me realizing that dream were honestly pretty fair and reasonable. And I'm so grateful to, instead of a career as an astronaut, to have found a place in the land conservation community, which is a good fit for my actual skill set. It's a privilege to be here with good people doing this good work. What we do really makes a difference. Just drive around this area and you'll see it. But sometimes the barriers to realizing dreams aren't so reasonable, and they keep good people from doing the good work of farming. So, bridging the gap is an opportunity to listen and to learn, to have a thoughtful conversation about the obstacles confronting farmers, whether they're structural, logistical, or financial, or anything else. Our local farmers are some of the best stewards of the land you'll ever see. They are skilled and knowledgeable and committed to the health of the land. So remember that as we're going through everything tonight. Farmers need land and land needs farmers. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Cameron.
Thank you, Julie. And that was a great platform to jump off of. So I work with the Columbia Land Conservancy, whose mission is to bring people together to conserve and appreciate and enjoy land. The area that we work in is Columbia County. And the way we work towards that mission statement is through education programs. We offer public programming throughout the year, both virtual and in person, many of which are free. We own and operate or own and manage 10 public areas that have nearly 30 miles of trails on about 1,200 acres of land. Offer municipal support, and then also land protection, which Julie did a great job laying kind of the foundations of that. CLC has protected 38,000 acres of land, and 12,000 of those acres are farmland that was protected through state and federal funding. And those funding sources were able to pay $31 million directly to farmland owners for selling their development rights. Our farmland work broadly supports land access, farmland retention, and farmland transition, knowing that the biggest barrier that we face in Columbia County and Dutchess County as well is affordability of farmland. A lot of my work would not be necessary if farmers could afford land to buy. They would not need me. So a lot of this is kind of creating different creative ways to get farmers on land. One of the ways we do that is through the farmland matching program that Julie mentioned, that we operate in collaboration with the Dutchess Land Conservancy. So that covers both Columbia and Dutchess. And then we also work kind of alongside as well the Farmland for New Generation New York, which operates the Farm Finder website, which is the online presence of the matching work. What that match program looks like is the goal is to connect farmers who are looking for land with landowners who have farmland and are looking for a farmer. We provide support through the whole process of trying to create a successful relationship between those two folks. We help create profiles on the Farmland for New Generation website. We will offer referrals to professionals or other service providers that can offer support and the details of the folks we're working with. We offer farmland evaluation and individual consultation. We also offer support navigation through the farmland transition process, which is kind of some of the statistics that were mentioned. There's a lot of folks that or a lot of farmland that's about to transition or in the process of transitioning to new hands, and wanting to make sure exiting farmers have income while also making sure there's not a affordability barrier for incoming farmers. So that can be fairly complicated. So we also help support people navigate that process. Yeah, that's kind of the summation. I'm excited to be part of this and continue that work of how to bridge that gap.
It's me right now. All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for everyone for being here. I see a few familiar faces and some new names. So thanks everyone for being here to spend this time with us. My name is Dee Rooney. I use any pronoun or D. I am the Director of Farm Operations, a worker owner and a co-founder of Rocksteady Farm. We're heading into our 10th season, which is kind of mind-boggling. And but really proud to be able to say that. And yeah, so for those of you that may not know who Rocksteady is, we are a queer, trans, and multi-racially led worker cooperative farm, and we're rooted in social justice, food access, and education that centers queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and non-Black people of color that are beginning farmers. Our first season was in 2016. However, in 2021 is when we started our beginner farmer training programs, and there are several that we do. One is called Pollinate, which is this wonderful 2-week immersion where it's a paid opportunity for QTPOC beginner farmers to come and spend time on our farm to learn ways of cooperative business structure, sowing seeds, transplanting, relational aspects of the work that we do as well. And it's really robust, as well as a QT BIPOC beginner farm tractor training, which is really exciting. I love that one. Me and another farmer co-created that, and that's really wonderful. And in spite of starting these programs in 2021, we knew that there are challenges, there are barriers to folks accessing affordable land to start their projects. And Rocksteady has chosen to spearhead this endeavor. The work that we're doing right now is a project that's dedicated to advocating for the reduction of barriers that beginner farmers are facing, in particular, marginalized individuals, queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, rural farmers in our area. And it's because that we've been training in these last 4 to 5 years, hundreds of beginner farmers, and many of them are moving to this area for this type of experience, and they want to root here, and they want to build this community with us as well. So we're really eager to work with as many people as possible and build solid relationships so that we can eliminate a lot of the barriers that these folks are facing. So really glad to be here with all of you tonight.
Thanks so much, Julie D. Cameron. I'll now pass it to you, Stephanie, to speak a little on NEFOC.
Lego, Sewa, Gwego, Stephanie Morningstar, Young Yachts. Hi, everybody. I'm Stephanie Morningstar. I'm Mohawk Turtle Clan. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, and I'm grateful to be here today to share a little bit about our work and our approach regarding bridging this enormous gap that exists for farmers of color looking for land to be able to tend and feed our communities. First, I wanted to just introduce the work of NEFOC, our vision, and just thank the nations whose territories we all reside upon and occupy, most specifically the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which is my nation, my Confederacy of Nations, as well as the Wabanaki Confederacy, as well as the Lenape, the Stockbridge Munsee, the Nipmuc, the Pecumtuck, and many, many nations that make up what is now known as the Northeast part of the United States. So grateful to be able to do this work in their territories and build ways to be able to be reciprocal to them as we occupy and tend and co-steward these territories with our people. The work of NEFOC, from the very inception of the work that we've done, has focused on three things: advancing Indigenous sovereignty and honoring Indigenous sovereignty, rematriating through rematration of land, reparative justice that includes ways to be able to repair the land dispossession that we've unfortunately experienced throughout the history of what is now known as the US, and building approaches of solidarity, specifically approaches that include Black Indigenous solidarity, due to the level of oppression Olympics that have been unfortunately sort of cast upon our relationships and overshadowed our relationships that were originally built on solidarity. So those are the things that we focus on at NEFOC. Our work is fairly unique, and on Turtle Island, still to this day, we're still one of the only BIPOC-led land trusts out there that's multiracial and collaborative, specifically focusing on Black Indigenous solidarity and with pathways to rematriation of land. The historical context of land dispossession is really where a lot of this came from, especially regarding the treaties that we are living under, the political agreements that we've made, the United States has made with sovereign Indigenous nations. Specifically in New York State, we would be looking at the largest treaty in New York State, which is the Canandaigua Treaty of 1794, which was meant to protect Haudenosaunee land rights in our territories and has been systematically broken since the beginning. Policies like the Homestead Act of 1862, while they didn't necessarily impact the Northeast because we're part of the original 13 colonies, the spirit and intent of the Homestead Act, which is racially discriminatory practices that offered land to folks moving west, that same manifest destiny idea has been sort of embraced by settlers in the Northeast as well. The Northeast also, just to remind you, is largely unceded territory, part of those original 13 colonies. And that created a really interesting problem for us to be able to address. How do we honor Indigenous sovereignty without a treaty? So just to acknowledge that unceded territory is territory that hasn't had a treaty. It hasn't been ceded by Indigenous people. It's simply just been settled and occupied and stolen from Indigenous people. So we are trying to reconcile that, the idea of honoring treaties, honoring unceded land and land theft, and also honoring the idea that the labor of formerly enslaved peoples is what made this country what it is today. And how do we work within a reparative framework? How do we heal all of these fractures without getting into silos that separate us and divide us and break that solidarity that we've relied on for so long? So today, like Noah mentioned, less than 1% of farmland is owned by Black farmers, and 1.6% of New York farmers are people of color, despite making up 48% of the population. And quite a few of them are farm workers as well. So we're growing your food, we're picking your food, but we're not necessarily owning the land that the food is on or being able to be in any deep relationship with that land. My experience is really what drove me to create this land trust. As somebody who's been landless in my own territory for a long time and not being able to simply grow food for my community, it was something that made me realize that we need to address this in a larger way. It isn't just about one-off land projects, but we really need to create and mobilize knowledge around why and how land dispossession has created a system level, and when I say system, I mean every system, including the healthcare system level way of marginalizing us, specifically the social determinants of health, for example, and how land dispossession has impacted our health in that way. So we're constantly a land trust in the work that we're doing, but we're also something a bit more, and that we're trying to provoke thought, and we're trying to impact system level shifts in the work that we do. So you'll see that we're kind of a land trust, but we're not kind of, we are a land trust, but we also act in ways that are not necessarily aligned with what other land trusts are doing, because the land trusts who are operating in the United States right now follow a very specific pattern, and that pattern treats land like property. It dehumanizes land, or it depersonifies land. And we do see land as a being that needs tending and caring, we are responsible for. So I just wanted to make mention of that, and I wanted to lift up some of the ways that we're doing this work. So I didn't create a presentation today. I just wanted to talk like sort of person to person, people to people. But we wanted to share that some of the ways that we're approaching this work are holding land for Black, Indigenous, and POC-led land projects and individual farmers, not only by matching land, but ensuring that the land matching that we're working with is culturally sensitive, culturally humble, and culturally specific. So when we don't just purchase land and hold land, we also link land in our own way. We have a database of folks who have contacted us specifically, who have land, who are aligned with our values, who we vetted, and we will put them in touch with folks and be able to sort of, not broker, we don't like to use that term, but we're sort of relationship brokers in that level. So ensuring that the folks who we're working with, who are interested in either, say, rematriating land to a nation or to an Indigenous community, or would like to offer reparations, that we're ensuring that those people are safe enough to be in contact with the farmers of color who we're working with. We've experienced quite a bit of harm that leads to broken deals. One of the biggest things that we see are people selling land that they're leasing out to farmers, and then the farmer needs to leave that land and then restart their entire process and their entire operation all over again. So what we're looking for is to shift that narrative by creating permanent and secure land tenure for farmers of color in a manner that is aligned with our ancestors' vision for regenerative ecosystems, sustainable human habitat, native species ecosystem preservation, ceremony, and cultural preservation. One of the ways that we're doing this is by something we've called the Advancing Indigenous Reciprocity Toolkit, which is around helping other land trusts and helping other land and food access organizations understand what it means to be Indigenous and understand what it means to work with Indigenous people and on Indigenous territory. Reciprocity is at the core of our work. So reciprocity matters in land work because many land trusts and conservation organizations approach land protection without consultation or relationship building with Indigenous communities or any commitment to sovereignty, and understanding that they are occupying and own title to Indigenous land. Reciprocity is all about action. It's not just about acknowledgement. It means returning land, respecting Indigenous governance, and ensuring access to land-based practices. So the toolkit is a great way for us to be able to help landowners, organizations, and land trusts move beyond land acknowledgements into concrete actions. And that includes guidelines for ethical land return and land sharing agreements that help structure land access in ways that support Indigenous governance, not just conservation. It offers best practices for partnership and relationship building, encouraging long-term collaboration rather than short-term transactional support. It also offers strategies for Indigenous-led land stewardship, helping landowners and organizations defer land decision-making to Indigenous nations and communities. And it also offers policy and advocacy recommendations that identify barriers in local, state, and federal policy that push for reforms and uphold Indigenous land rights. You can see this in the way that we're doing the work at, for example, a couple of our land projects. One of them is the New Sons Community Center, which was a donated church in Thetford, Vermont. In that place, we are working to restore an old church, and it's turned into this New Sons Community Center. And we've been working alongside the Abenaki at Odanak who have been central to ensuring that this land donation is aligned with their priorities. Similarly, here in Western New York, we're working on a Haudenosaunee-led project that centers Indigenous governance while also making space for Black refugee and migrant farmers. We're leasing out 20 acres of land to Black refugee and migrant farmers. We have a 10-acre Haudenosaunee food forest, and we have the Claudia J. Ford Liberation Library, which is dedicated to Black Indigenous solidarity, or what we call braided bliss, Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty and solidarity. Our commitments to land back in this regard are working directly with Indigenous nations and communities and identifying opportunities for land return, not just land sharing as well. So we support BIPOC farmers and ethical land transfers by offering a bit of a wraparound approach. So our programming sort of addresses all of the needs, not just offering land access, but also offering the resources, education, access to markets, access to technical support and assistance and policy that will help a farmer of color be successful on that land as well. You can't just give land access without access to being able to put infrastructure on that land and scale farmers up to ensure that they're going to be successful and ready to farm. So we offer technical assistance for BIPOC farmers, specifically land projects we're working with. There's a great project that we did over the summer called the On the Way Tour with Christine Hutchinson, one of our co-directors, where they basically just took a bus and they drove with a bunch of Black farmers from central New York all the way up to Maine and just helped out, like on the most basic level technical assistance, putting up fencing and helping people harvest and plant and do big projects around different farms. We also do advocacy and policy work, fighting for legislative changes that benefit us in some way. This is really, really at the forefront right now. And Robert Chang and Larissa Jacobson, our co-directors in policy and climate justice, are both just working tirelessly to be able to just even keep their finger on the pulse of what's happening right now. We're also working on land rematriation and reparative land transfers. That's in my program, the Relationships and Reciprocity program. And that's working to help folks understand what it means to return land to Indigenous nations and supporting cooperative landholding models. We're doing that with an organization or a group called Sky Woman Forever Farm, a Mohawk-led project in Schoharie, New York. And we're also, like I said, offering that wraparound support. What's working for farmers right now are community land models and cooperative ownership, direct land donations within those reparative frameworks, and funding models that prioritize BIPOC governance and leadership. What's not working are short-term unstable leases that limit investment in our land, conservation easements that exclude Indigenous land access, and lack of infrastructure and financial support for first-generation farmers of color. So just to sort of wrap it up, I know I have about a minute and a half left. Just to show up and say, like, how can you show up as a landowner, as a white-led land trust, as somebody who wants to show up for this work? One of the things you can do is shift power and resources. That's the first thing that we always need, as to recenter or decenter power and give us a little bit of space and resources to be able to do the work that we're doing. So supporting BIPOC-led land trusts, such as NEFOC, supporting BIPOC-led land projects that are all over the place. And you can find some of those on our reparations map, which is on our website. And instead of directing that funding to white-led organizations who then pay that, subgrant that money out the way that they see fit. Also advocating for equity-based funding structures that prioritize BIPOC-led land initiatives. So things like the Black Farmer Fund is a great example to support their work. Also collaboration without control. So co-management of land instead of collaboration is one way to do that, especially when it comes to Indigenous land return. Co-management is Indigenous people being able to manage their land and make decisions and governance decisions about their land without having to be interfered with. And also land transfers and ethical land stewardship. So establishing long-term affordable land leasing agreements that prioritize QTPOC and BIPOC farmers and our needs, and proactively transferring land to BIPOC-led land trusts when the opportunities arise, or holding land for BIPOC-led land trusts or other land projects on the terms that meet our needs. That's also a wonderful way to show up. So we just call for you to support us, support and land trust prioritize land justice and land sovereignty. And also land trusts who are not dialing back their DAI initiatives right now is a really important thing to mention. Use our toolkit, Engage NEFOC for engaging with the Advancing Indigenous Reciprocity Toolkit is a great way to do that. Consider land donations and ethical land transitions that actively support reparative land access. And join in the community. We have NEFOC neighbors networks that are popping up all over the place to ensure that not only are we able to farm and feed our communities, but we're doing that in a way that where we feel safe. So that's what I'll say for now. Thank you so much for inviting me to come and share a little bit about our work.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Okay, y'all, now we are going to hop into about 10, 12 minutes of Q&A. We had one little question coming through the chat. Please feel free to share some more in the chat so we can keep this conversation going. But the question we did receive that we could start with was from Dan, and it is, what is the average length of leases organized through the farmer landowner match program? I'll put his question in the chat. Maybe Cameron or Julie can take this one.
I apologize. I got totally distracted by trying to look for it. Can you say it one more time?
Yes, and I put it in the chat again. What is the average length of leases organized through the farmer landowner match program?
That's a good question. There is a decent variety that does range. I feel like the most common situation, particularly if it's folks that don't know each other before going into to a lease agreement, is okay, I'll back up. If it's someone who's interested in receiving the tax break through the ag assessment program with soil and water, well, that soil and water is a part of through the state, the minimum lease requirement for that is 5 years. So if that's kind of the goal, then it's pretty common for 5-year leases so that can be received. If it's not someone looking for that, and for example, just recently talking to someone who is open to lease to own, but wants to have space to build a relationship with someone before going into that process. So yeah, that's hard. I mean, it could be anywhere from like 1 to 5 years is kind of the low end, and probably more common.
Thank you for that question, Dan. I also saw Lauren ask in the chat, asking Stephanie if you can reiterate the NEFOC Neighbors program that you mentioned, the name of that.
Yeah, for sure. And I was also going to just sort of answer that last question as well from our perspective, I guess, because we also do land matching, and our leases are a little different. So, for example, we just matched land in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and that is an ongoing NEFOC project that will eventually be transferred to NEFOC. Right now, it's in partnership with Grow Food Northampton, and that is we start off with a 3-year lease, and then if they want to increase that lease, then they would do a 6-year lease. And if they still feel called to be on that space and further farm, we then would offer a 99-year inheritable lease. So the goal is to make sure that folks feel like they don't, number one, that they're not locked in initially into something where maybe they just want to try it out. So we noticed initially we were starting with 99-year inheritable leases, and it almost scared people because they're not used to that level of being able to have that much permanency. So we're starting like a trial model where there's 3 years and then 6 years. And then after that, if they still feel like they want to be there, then a 99-year inheritable lease. And that inheritable part is something that literally made one of the farmers here in Western New York and Buffalo cry. When I told him about it, he was so moved by the idea that he would never have to leave that land. And in fact, his children would be able to inherit that lease. So I just wanted to answer that. And then I'm going to share this in 2 different somebody asked me to share the calls to action, so I'm going to do that as well in two separate posts. And the Neighbors Network is something that cropped up because of the racialized violence that our farmers have experienced. Honestly, we've had farmers in various parts of New York State experience gun violence by their neighbors. We've had barns burnt down. We've had many different things happen that made it necessary for us to have a neighbors network. And so the neighbors network sort of emerges very organically, like mushrooms, really. It's like the soil is healthy enough that mushrooms can emerge, right? And those mushrooms are our neighbors who are surrounding us with support around a land project. So it isn't something that we've expanded into like a Northeast wide network at this point, because it's really more for supporting within a hyper local area the farmers on a land project. So for example, we have a really strong neighbors network up in Thetford, Vermont around the New Sons Community Center, that is composed of, say, the parishioners that used to go to the church, who still go to the church and lease that time from New Sons Community Center, just the community in general. And here in Buffalo, we're starting another one because we have so many. We have two projects that are starting. There's one in the city, and then there's also one on an 80-acre parcel of land that's rural that we're just beginning. So we're just in the beginning stages of relationship building and recruitment. And the way that we're doing that is by building an earthen pizza oven on the farm project in East Aurora, where we're doing our new land project, and just having pizza parties and calling folks in to build relationships. You can do that yourself as well, but right now we're trying to make sure that there's, sort of like a phone tree list almost, because we've had to use it often where, if somebody is experiencing, people walking up to them on their own farm and saying, who are you and what are you doing in my community? And it's just, yeah, so it's been really important to be able to build those relationships fairly organically as our land projects start to emerge from the work that we're doing.
Thank you, Stephanie, for answering that question as well. Yeah, the floor is open. Would anyone like to share in the chat? If any of the facilitation team also has questions for each other, or questions that might be helpful for folks to ask, I can ask the question, you can answer it.
I have a question. For the land trusts here, I'm wondering if you can sort of talk about any success stories that you've had, or maybe not specific stories, but how you have had success in working with landowners to move the needle on some of these equity issues in leasing and selling land.
I guess I can answer that. I just wanted to leave space because I've been talking a lot. I don't know if Cameron or Julie have anything you want to add before I speak.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. Sure. So that's basically what we do as far as land matching is constantly working to move the needle on these equity issues, like you mentioned, Lauren. What I found is that the best way to approach it, and the success stories that we've had, whether it's been a land linking or land donation, is through something we call relational accountability. Our approach is deeply rooted in that framework. And that is something that is slow. It's sort of anti-transactional in a way. It's very much about building from a relational perspective and being accountable to one another, just the way it says. It's something that helps you kind of slow the roll down. What I've noticed is over the past 6 years of doing this work, I can't believe it's been 6 years already, but we had hundreds and hundreds of people reach out to NEFOC when we first started, and throughout the time that we've been doing this work, who want to try on the idea of transferring land or leasing land or somehow shifting land into stewardship of BIPOC folks. And what I found is that about 95% of those conversations fell flat after the idea of trying on the feeling, almost like a somatic experience of embodying what it feels like to transfer land or rematriate land has been sort of realized in their mind. So going through the process, having a conversation with us describing the process and describing all the different sort of ways to be able to engage leasing land or rematriating land or returning land or donating land. Most of the time it was like that was enough to be able to satisfy some level of quelling a feeling of guilt guilt and shame that were sitting in that person. So what we've had to do is sort of separate the wheat from the chaff using an agricultural reference and, hold space for these people because you never know what's going on. And I think it's just relational accountability to be able to hold space on that level. But after folks have tried it on and they kind of disappear and say that that's not for me, or I can't do that, or I have too many, too much invested, or my family members would oppose, or whatever it is, the success stories that rise to the top are the ones where, and we've seen quite a few of them at NEFOC, not only with land, but with also resource redistribution. There is just sort of a selfless, it doesn't come from a place of guilt. It comes from a place of solidarity. And Thetford Church is a great one because it's an entire community, right? Like Thetford Church, that space was an entire community approaching NEFOC to say, we recognize that this is not our land and we're occupying this land in a way that we want to start repairing. We want to be in solidarity with you. And they did exactly what we said. They shifted power. They shifted resources. We're the ones making decisions for this space now. And it's become like a really beautiful way to build community in that area in a way that's built really strong mutual aid networks now. The way that folks showed up during COVID was a great example. The church became a center for food sovereignty and food redistribution. We now have pottery classes and skating parties and an Octavia Butler reading group. It's just been like amazing, and it's all cross-cultural. Here in Western New York, we have another transfer happening with an urban farm. And again, there's this success story in that a lot of the land around here and everywhere right now could be maximized by just price wise. Everything is insanely expensive, and folks are selling us land without making a profit. Like they can't necessarily sell us, like give us the land often, but they're not trying to capitalize on the land. They're just trying to break even. And that's something to think about. When I started doing this work, somebody actually said to me, well, what do you think I'm supposed to do? Am I supposed to like pay my mortgage off and then just give you our house? And I'm like, no, it's not about that. Like, we're not looking to further marginalize people who are also not able to make ends meet. But those who know that they have the resources to be able to do something more, those success stories, I think, are seeing resources being redistributed and land being shared in a way that isn't treating land like property. It's about treating land in a way that recognizes that they want that land to be cared for. And there's a level of trust that's been built and relationship that's been built. Here in Western New York, on the newest land project, we have Skyworld Village. The person who is selling us that land at cost, she's not making anything off of it. She wants to be a part of this whole project. She's really interested in starting up the neighbors network for us, for example. Like she doesn't want to say goodbye to that land. She also feels connected to it. And I think that part of the success story isn't just about transferring land to Black, Indigenous, and POC people. I fully, obviously, that's what I work for every single day of my life. But it's about building these stronger mutual aid networks and stronger sort of what we call polycultural mycorrhizal networks that include white folks, so that we can, especially right now, survive nothing less than a fascist theocracy and oligarchy that we're all having to endure right now. And I'll just end by saying that the biggest success that I can see is when we finally feel healthy and joyful again. And I can see that starting to emerge. I can see the joy that's emerging from the collaborations, the parties, the gatherings, the food, and to be able to sit around a table. That is my success story, is to see us sitting around a table eating the food that we grew on that land together.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren, for bringing that to the table. Just noting the time, we are at 5:59. If you have to hop off, please feel free to do so. That's why we are recording a session. But we had another question come in. I think we can take this question and then go through some closing comments, unless anyone has anything else to share. But Chelsea has asked, I've heard a little bit about cultural land easements, and I'm wondering where we can learn more about them, their efficacy, and examples around New York State.
The first resource that pops into my mind for this question is to reach out to the Land Trust Alliance of New York. That's kind of the overarching organization that most land trusts are participating in. And if you're talking about finding out what's going on in all of New York, that would be the place to start. They could probably point you towards particular land trusts that might have sample documents to help you understand that.
QTPOC also is one of the originators of or thought partners on cultural respect easements. We also have 3 in New York State that we're working on currently. They begin as cultural use agreements, actually, which are semi-permanent. They last about 5 years. And we have, actually, we're going to be doing one by you folks out at Brock Study. We're going to be working on a cultural respect easement with the Stockbridge Muncie at Wildseed. That's an example of one. We're also doing one here in Buffalo at our land in the city. We're putting a respect easement on that land, as well as the land here at East Aurora, New York. And that's it's allowing the Seneca Nation and partnering with the Seneca Nation to be able to come and hunt and harvest and forage, as well as we're putting up some resources to be able to process deer and process hunting. But really, they're an agreement that are, again, based on relationship. We have sample documents we can share with folks. If people are interested in reaching out, we can share a draft document of a sample agreement. I learned about them from Ramona Peters, and we did a webinar on them about 5 years ago during COVID. She's the president of Native Land Conservancy, who's a really strong partner of ours. And we work specifically with the Wabanaki Land Stewardship Commission as well, in order to learn from them about their own cultural respect easement process. So it's been a pretty interesting tool. Again, it's not something I would suggest doing, just offering a cultural respect easement without building relationship first. We just always begin from that place, but it can be a really wonderful way to build relationship and create Indigenous land access without necessarily having to move off of your land. So it's a great way to just say, I acknowledge this is your territory and we want you to be able to access it the way that you should be able to. And there are lots of ways to negotiate those easements as well. So it isn't just sort of a overarching easement. There's lots of negotiation that happens very specifically for even like notifying folks if you're coming onto the land, and or people sometimes don't want a fire started or something. So there's a lot to think about and talk about, and NEFOC is actually going to be offering a whole webinar series on that toolkit that I was mentioning, including a whole chapter just on cultural respect easements with case studies in 2026.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chelsea, for the question, and thank you, Stephanie and Julie. Okay, everyone. It is 6:03. I wanted to quickly mention and plug that this is only part 1 of this 3-part series. We will be having part 2 next Thursday in person at the Millerton Movie House. It will be a panel. Folks will be able to meet each other and just like build these relationships that Stephanie has emphasized so much. It is like a very imperative part about the land back movement and reparations, and transferring land, and ensuring that those lands transfers are sustainable. So please consider joining us in Millerton. I am going to put the Dutchess Land Conservancy Eventbrite in the chat. That's where you can go register and learn more. You can also register for part 3 on that link, which will be April 1st. And that will be just another Zoom call, if being in person is not possible for you in this moment. But thank you all so much. Thank you, and a round of applause to you all, and also to Julie, Dee, Cameron, Stephanie. Thank you all so much for fostering questions and sharing a little bit about your organizations. And yes, just deep gratitude and appreciation to everyone who is curious about this work. It is really so essential, especially in this time. So yeah. Please join us next week in April, and we will hopefully see you all very soon. And keep an eye out for a feedback survey that will be going out in after sometime at the end of the week, maybe next week.
Can I make a quick plug?
Yeah.
I just want to thank Noah. Noah is also the creator of this program. So I just really want to, they've been working really hard on this project for months now. So just really uplifting you, Noah, and the work that you're doing and committed. You're very committed to this. So just really appreciating you as well.
Thank you, Dee. I appreciate you.
Thank you to everybody. Have a lovely evening. Be well, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.